Calling to order the regular meeting of the IVDA on this April 9th, 2019. Madam Clerk, would you please call roll call?
Certainly. Please state your name for the record. From the City of Colton?
Frank Navarro.
Isaac Suchel.
Thank you very much. From the City of Loma Linda?
Ovi. And I know that Dusty's here too.
Mayor Rigsby is also here for the record. From the County of San Bernardino 5th District?
Josie Gonzalez.
From the County of San Bernardino 4th District?
Kurt Hagman.
Thank you. And from the City of San Bernardino?
John Valdivia.
Bessim Richard.
Thank you very much.
And I know that it was pronounced that the mayor was here, but I need a vocal call.
And please state your name for the record,
Yes.
record from the City of Loma Linda.
Still Dusty Rigsby.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. At this time, I will say that Mr. Mark Gibbs is standing in for Mr. Mike Burrows. And at this time, Mr. Gibbs, will we be having closed session?
Yes, Supervisor, we will.
Absolutely. Anyone here from the public wishing to come forward to speak on an item on closed session? Seeing no one, at this point, we will recess for closed session. Any reportable action from closed session, legal counsel?
There is not, Madam Chair.
All right, then at this time, we call to order for the open session. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Place your hand over your heart and be ready. Begin. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so very much. Please be seated. Any items to be added or deleted from the agenda, Mr. Gibbs?
No, Madam Supervisor.
All right. And any conflict of interest statements to be made at this time? Seeing none, I will at this time, any informational items, Mr. Gibbs?
Yes, we do have one informational item on submission of ROPS, and I'd like Mr. Gray to give you a report on that.
Thank you. Page 27, item 2B, informational item in February of each year, and as well as this year, we required to file a annual recognized obligation payment schedule, ROPS, with the State of California Department of Finance. This year, the submissions were reviewed and approved by the countywide oversight board that I was there to submit that at the county building, and DOF is now in the process of reviewing our ROPS. We have, as of a couple hours ago, received no feedback on that. Hopefully it'll happen the next day or two, and that'll be the determination letter. We get that every 6 months. Yeah, well, every year now. In addition to this activity, the IVDA successor agency is required to make a timely continuing bond disclosure on our bonds, result of the 2014 IVDA tax allocation refunding bonds. And this includes having our fiscal consultant, RSG, out of Anaheim, confirm property tax receipts from the county and calculate the total assessed valuation in the IVDA base reuse project area. And the results of this year's updates were recently completed, and you'll see that as an attachment, I believe, on the next page, page 28.
Page 28.
Inland Valley Development Agency, dated March 13th, 2019. There is a Table 1, 2018-19 estimated valuation of the property tax revenue, and this is done every year by RSG. And significantly, what this report shows year over year is the increase or decrease in property values in the area. And for the last few years, as most of us know, that assessed valuation has increased markedly. In this case, I believe the little footnote or little bubble comment box there is that we have over $7.6 billion for 2018-19 fiscal year in assessed valuations. and that's up from last year about, I believe, about 10%. Oh, yes, here it is on the report. So going back to the staff report, shows 10.2% annual growth for a total of $7.6 billion in assessed valuation. RSG files this report as a continuing disclosure with EMMA, which stands for the Electronic Municipal Market Access. It's a website funded and operated by the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board out of Washington. And it's a regulatory organization charged by Congress and designated by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission as an official source for municipal securities data such as ours and disclosure documents. So that concludes my report on this staff report, unless you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. Any questions, board members? Hearing none. Any additional informational items, Mr. Gibbs?
No, Madam.
Thank you very much. At this time, I will consider the items on the consent calendar.
Move the consent calendar.
I have a motion from Councilmember Sucho. Is there a second?
Second.
A second from Mayor Valdivia. Any comments? Any questions? Any opposition? Anyone from the public wishing to come forward? No speaker slips? Hearing none, the consent calendar is approved. Moving on to item number 9, which is to consider and discuss a report of economic development initiatives. Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Supervisor. So this is in keeping with the IVDA's mission of increasing economic activity in and around the former Air Force Base as one of the main tenets of the agency's purpose. As we all know, over 10,000 jobs were lost when the base closed, as well as $1.9 billion in economic activity. I think it's important to note that in 2016, it was a milestone year for us. That was the first year that all of the jobs that were lost was exceeded in new jobs, as well as economic activity. So if you go to the next slide, if you would please. So this shows the progress made over the years by the IVDA in bringing jobs back to the community, as well as economic activity. So you see in 2016, that was the first year, that was that milestone where that 10,000 jobs lost were regained. And since then, progress has continued. In 2017, we hit 11,575 jobs. And we do expect 2018 numbers to be available in the month of June of this year. Early indications are starting to come in. It's looking positive. We do think that we will exceed 2017's number. So we're very excited about that. For the top 10 industries, so the economic activity, that economic output includes, this is a breakdown of where those sectors are in the economy, as well as that includes labor, as well as direct and both indirect effects with the total output you can see on the far right up there of $2.34 billion in economic activity. So the next slide shows the major employers in the IVDA redevelopment area. Top amongst them is Amazon at 4,900 direct jobs, and I think that's important to note. These are direct jobs. These are not indirect or induced jobs. These are direct jobs. And the other one I think that's important to point out on this slide is the airport. It has continued to move up the ladder here, and in 2017 was the third largest employer. We do expect to see a nice uptick in that number on the airport yet again, particularly with some of the new anchor tenants that have taken up residence at the airport, which include FedEx, UPS, and Unicow, are our three major anchor tenants.
So those numbers do not include them? Or they do include them?
This one would include a little bit from UPS, and it would include most of the numbers from Unicow. It would not pick up the large increase we saw in 2018 from UPS. It doesn't pick up FedEx, and it's probably a 10 to 15% growth in Unicow's employment. So for an overview, this is the essentially the IVDA
Please,
redevelopment
hold on a minute.
area. Yes.
Mr. Gibbs?
I
Yes,
have a question. On that prior slide, are these employers being secretive about this, or are these rounded numbers? Do they cancel each other out? Is everything rounded up? Because they're all round numbers except for the airport.
So our clerk of the board takes quite a bit of time in contacting each employer to get specific job numbers from them. Now, we do rely on the data from the employers, but no, it's not a WAG. I would say it's about as accurate as you can get. But we do get specific and succinct numbers from these employers.
all right, go ahead.
So the next slide, this is the IVDA redevelopment area. So 3-mile radius around the airport that includes some of the multi-jurisdictional specific plans that are part of the success of the redevelopment area. And fundamental to that success on the next slide is the public-private partnership that the IVDA has found a lot of success with through the relationship with Hillwood. And that has brought a lot of increased economic activity to the region, as well as made important infrastructure improvements that have led to further developers, not only Hillwood, but additional developers as well.
Question, Mr. Gibbs?
Yes.
Supervisor Hagman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize, members, because I know I'm fairly new to this. But as I look at your mix of employers, and I guess you have two different bodies. You have the airport and you have IVDA. As IVDA goes, okay, you're increasing. You're back up to where you were when this whole thing collapsed. From experience I have with our airport in Ontario, you can't make an airport successful unless you have the land available to the airport for aviation-related industries. The biggest employers, except for Amazon, and I know you got UPS coming and some expansion there, but a lot of them have nothing to do with airport operations. They're not flying food, they're not flying products. And I'm just wondering, are you going to be an airport or are you going to be industrial zone? But I don't think you'd be good at both. And as you go forward, since you stop the bleeding, what is the strategic mission at this point? Is to fill up empty space as quick as you can, the first person that comes gives you a deal? Or is there a plan to, because I know how complicated it is to put all these pieces together to make an airport a successful airport. But if you have all your stuff in long-term leases or sellouts to non-aviation uses, then you can't be a successful airport. So I'm just curious on these, what's left here. Do you have that ability to do that yet, if that's still a primary mission of SBIA?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. On the airport side itself, there was a time 10 years ago or so where there were plenty of non-aviation uses on the airport. That has changed. So the job numbers on the airport, for example, 95, 98% of them are aviation uses. So that's absolutely important to us. And the quality of our tenants has continued to increase over time. But that aviation use is certainly first and foremost, and it's one of our requirements for leasing things such as hangars.
Yeah,
on the airport property, yes.
Property adjacent to the airport, the 1 million square foot warehouses you need for Amazon or UPS or Prime or DHL, and those support services around there, freight forwarders, those type of things, eventually for passengers, you still need to have capacity for them, otherwise they're going to keep looking.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And one of the strategic advantages that the IVDA is very much in tune with is the zoning that's taken place around the airport. So if you go back to when it was Norton, and there was there was quite a bit of consideration given to what types of uses are compatible around the airport, and there are plenty of existing non-conforming uses surrounding the airport. So there are residences that are actually in zones that have been reclassified as either light industrial or heavy industrial. And the intent of that is for the long-term promotion of the airport, so there aren't any incompatible uses from a noise standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, that's consistent, particularly with California State Aeronautics, who is really the planning entity to try to prevent encroachment around airports. It's a big issue in the industry. We're fortunate in the IVDA being able to help designate what those zoning requirements are around the airport.
I think, I will add that I think that Supervisor Hagman is correct in identifying what a huge opportunity we have now. We didn't have this opportunity in the past because we were always pretty much in the red. Whether in the red when it came to attracting and retaining businesses. No one wanted to come here. When the military base closed down, they left a lot of their junk behind, and we had to fight for funding in order to be able to do the cleanup. So it was a very slow start. And what we do have in the surrounding, whether it's City of Highlands, City of San Bernardino, and the county come together, what we do have is land. And if in conjunction with the City of San Bernardino and City of Highland, we are able to enforce those strict land use zoning and designations, we will be able to harness that additional vacant land into only aviation-related type of businesses being located. And again, as time goes by, we will be able to, as contracts come to an end with other companies, and as they come to an end with other companies, we'll be able to include certain requirements or even say we will not renew. So I think it's been an uphill battle, and I think Supervisor Hagman's absolutely correct. Any other questions? Is your report complete or not yet?
Getting toward the end of it.
All right, let's do
real
it.
quick.
Let's do it.
So as part of the portfolio that the IVDA holds are the DFAS buildings, and that includes what's called DFAS 1 and DFAS 2. Got very low vacancy rates, and that's part of the ongoing funding source for the IVDA. The IVDA has also helped support infrastructure development on the airport. You could go to the next slide. And that included the recent addition of a, one more slide, please. That included a dedicated cargo road onto the airport directly off the main arterial, which is Tippecanoe Avenue. So it helps separate the traffic to the internal airport roadway system that is used by other businesses, and in the long term will be used to support use of the terminals. So we're able to separate that traffic, give them a more efficient route on and off of the airport, and we've got two very happy cargo tenants out there because of it. Another upcoming economic initiative is the airport-specific gateway, and that is making progress. We'll be hopefully getting across the goal line later this year, as well as the Mountain View Avenue. So phase 4 is coming up. There's a recent plan that the city of Loma Linda had been working toward for an off-ramp, which the IVDA was a contributing member toward. And lastly, the assessed valuation is also important to point out. In 2017, the project area increased in assessed value to over $7.6 billion. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, board members? Hearing none, this is just a receive and file.
Yes, ma'am.
Moving on to item number 10, which is to consider and discuss a report on the Central Avenue Corridor Development Project. Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. So along those, much in the same vein of the previous report, major capital improvements within the project redevelopment area have led to increased interest from private investment. So some of these improvements include such things as bridges, roads, major storm drain projects, and that has a tendency to attract additional private investment into the project area. As touched on earlier before, that increases economic activity, but more importantly, creating that that industrial segment, that industrial buffer around the airport that's consistent with the California Department of Aeronautics, consistent with those zoning requirements around the airport, is really fundamental. And the IVDA's charge in that process supports the long-term success of the airport. Thank you, Madam.
All right, any questions? Any comments? Hearing none, once again, a receive and file. Moving on to item number 11, which is to review status of the action plan for the Inland Valley Development Agency through June 30th, 2019. Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. This is the Economic Development Initiatives update for the month of April. And next month, we'll be bringing back additional information and reports on the multi-jurisdictional specific plan and the draft annual budget preparation, as well as grant initiatives for the coming fiscal year. And that concludes my report.
All right, questions, board members?
Do you know
Councilmember Popescu.
when we're gonna, as the Finance Committee is gonna be meeting on the next, I know you're preparing your budgets now, but we do have, I'm trying to remember, we do have new board addition that we may want to further educate about our budgets. And I know in the past, we've only had finance meetings once a year, but we'd like to have them more quarterly on a regular basis so we kept up to date as to what's happening financially. Now more than ever, since we're still dealing with a lot of financial strains. So do you have any ideas when the next finance meeting is going to be scheduled for the IVDA?
We'll be happy to follow up and schedule one. I don't know off the top of my head, but we're happy to schedule with you. That's a very important meeting, particularly around budget time.
I believe it should be scheduled in May, according to Ms.
First
Burrows.
week of May? Okay.
Yes,
Well, it would be the next.
right prior to this meeting
the
in
meeting.
May.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Anything else on this item? Hearing none, once again, this is a receive and file. At this time, I will ask if anyone from the general public wishes to come forward to speak on an item on or off the agenda, but relative to this agency. Seeing no one, I will close the public comment. Board members, any comments? Just one question from me in regards to the executive director's evaluation that will be coming up. Mr. Lewin, would you please just give us a bit of information on what we can expect, and then also something relevant to the new board members?
Okay. Mike Burrows' employment contract requires to complete an annual evaluation. It needs to be completed by June. In this particular year, his contract runs on a 2-year cycle. It will be up in this June 30th, so we will need to be taking that into consideration. What I would like to do in order to advance this process is send the standard evaluation form that we've used in recent years to all of the board members so that you could complete that in advance and we can have a substantive discussion, which I will calendar, or I should say agendize for our meeting in May, and we can hopefully get through that process efficiently at that time then.
All right, I think that would be nice, especially for the new board members, being that they've not been on board very long, but could definitely benefit for the next evaluation, becoming familiar with the process, what's going to be expected, and then hopefully those, 2, 3 of us that were former members, that we will be able to provide the kind of information and hopefully the assurances relative to questions and answers on the evaluation.
Okay, thank you. And I will be emailing out to all of the board members probably next week at this time, so you have adequate time to review it. Any questions, comments, you can, of course, contact me.
All right, any other questions? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned to our next regularly scheduled meeting on Wednesday, May 8th of this God-given year. Good afternoon, everyone.